So it's this narrative template that I wanted to look at. And what the book does is it says, you know what, this is Absurdistan. This is this country that has animated the conversation in Canada. And this is the country I discovered when I went there. These are the people I met. This is the story that they tell. And this is something of the vast gulf between these two things. Those are the stories I've been drawn to in my life, is those stories where this vast gulf exists between an imaginary country and a country that exists in the real world. The imaginary Indian and the Indian that will appear in the media, in the public discourse. And so I went there. And I went there again. And I went there again. And I went there again. And here's the narrative that I wanted to look beneath. It goes something like this. It's just a little thought experiment. It's kind of an account of Afghanistan that situates September 11th, 2001 at its heart. And you could quibble with it, please do, according to your political sensibilities. But this is a story that you could tell anywhere. You could write this in a Toronto Star column. You could write it in a Globe and Mail column. You could stand up in the House of Commons. I could be standing here and telling you this. Probably nobody would blink an eye. Looks like this. After Soviet troops poured into Afghanistan in the late 1970s, the United States opened up a decisive front in the Cold War by arming and training anti-Soviet mujahideen in order to overthrow Afghanistan's communist government and drive out the Russians. US President Ronald Reagan's mujahideen forces were victorious, but then they turned on one another in a long and horrific civil war that ended only in 1996, when the Islamic fundamentalist Taliban seized control of the country. At first welcomed by war-weary Afghans, the Taliban soon imposed an oppressive and brutal order derived from a strict interpretation of the Quran. The Taliban ended the anarchy of the warlord years, halted opium production, and tackled corruption. But in a classic case of foreign policy blowback, America's former anti-Soviet allies became America's sworn enemies. Owing to a strict Afghan tribal code of Pashtun Wali, which demands that Afghans protect their guests, the Taliban continued to provide shelter to Osama bin Laden, whose al-Qaeda terrorist network had targeted the United States. In response to the catastrophe of September 11th, the White House rallied America's NATO partners to a war on terror coalition that invaded Afghanistan and overthrew the Taliban government. But it wasn't long before the NATO coalition was sinking into a quagmire of Afghan hostility. Resentment of the US occupation soon evolved into defiance of Hamid Karzai's corrupt government and a dramatic upsurge in popular support for the Taliban insurgency. The ambitions of the US-led mission failed to take into account the deeply rooted religious traditions the Taliban represented in Afghan culture. While they are Muslim extremists, the Taliban have no ambitions for global terrorism, and Afghanistan is chronically plagued by insurgencies. Afghan society is conservative and profoundly misogynistic, and Afghans are fiercely independent and quick to take up arms against any foreign intervention, and this is why the West has failed in its effort to impose democracy on Afghanistan at the point of a gun.